Dame Maria, the issue of deductions is both incredibly important and it's sadly also often neglected. We often discuss the adequacy of social security as if it was simply a matter of looking at the value of benefits, and it is true that their value has fallen in real terms since 2010 as a result of below inflation operating and freezes. But that, Dame Maria, is only part of the story. We cannot assume that people are even getting the amounts that are set out in benefit rates, as we've heard from speakers today. About 42% of households on universal credit see their benefits reduced below the standard rates every month to repay debt to the government. That's about 2 million households. Deductions and debt to the government are at a scale we have never seen before, and they become a routine aspect of Social Security administration under the current government. This is a major change to the benefit system, which has largely, I'm afraid, escaped scrutiny. As the official opposition, we're not opposed to deductions in principle. The issue here is not one of principle, but of scale. There will probably always be a need for benefit deductions in Social Security. For a start, it's very unlikely that any system will ever completely eliminate incorrect benefit payments, and taxpayers will expect overpayments to be recovered wherever possible. There is also, though, and views differ on this, a role for repayable loans to smooth out the pressure of unpredictable costs, as we've had referred to today. But Dame Maria, we also need to recognise that deductions cause hardship for many families who by definition are on very low incomes. The Trussell Trust report that 57% of universal credit households that use food banks are facing deductions, and we've heard accounts of that today. The Trust's evidence indicates that 50% of people on universal credit with deductions have had more than one day in the previous month where they had either had only one meal or they'd gone without eating altogether. And that's compared to 26% of those who are without deductions. Dame Maria, as the Joseph Rowntree Trust has shown, deductions particularly hit families with children and people with limited capability for work, more than half of whom face deductions. There is little question that in the middle of the worst cost of living crisis for decades, benefit deductions are pushing families already struggling into destitution, as we heard earlier in the debate. And I hope members from across the House will agree that government should aim as far as possible to minimise the need for deductions. Unfortunately, at the moment, the opposite seems to be happening. When getting on for half of all universal credit households are facing deductions every month, we do need to recognise that the system is not working in the way that it should. And one of the main reasons for this, Dame Maria, is the timing of universal credit payments, as we heard earlier, a problem the government was repeatedly warned about at the design stage of UC. Families have to wait 5 weeks for the first universal credit payment, and somehow the government persuaded itself that this would not be a problem for the great majority of families claiming that they would have a pay packet or savings to tide them over. According to the Department of Work and Pensions, about 60% of people making new claims to universal credit have had to take an advance. And as of February this year, there were 732,000 households paying off new claims advances. In addition, Dame Maria, there are over 900,000 universal credit families facing deductions for budgeting advances. That's nearly 1 in 5 of all UC households who've had to take out a loan to get through the month. And again, we were promised that universal credit would deal much better with fluctuations in income and needs and the benefits it was replacing. That so many people needed to take out budgeting alternatives shows, unfortunately, this is far from the case. Dame Maria, while deductions may be a necessity, there is no excuse for using them as a default mechanism for dealing with problems that the government itself should have failed to address. Ministers should be trying to minimise deductions by addressing those problems at source. However, this is roughly the opposite of what the government has actually been doing. Where deductions are unavoidable, the government needs to manage them in a much more sensitive way, as we've heard pleas for today, taking into account the circumstances of individual households. And I'd like to refer to some research by the Trussell Trust. This is qualitative research which has shown that, and I'm quoting from it, many people who've experienced government debt repayments were not supported to understand the situation they were in, which is a crucial point. They didn't know why the money was owed, they didn't know how much they needed to repay, and they didn't know how long the repayments were going to last. Of particular concern was that they didn't know what, if any, options or choices were available to them. So, Dame Maria, given that deductions cause genuine hardship for so many families, we should, in my view, expect DWP to adopt a high standard of customer service, proactively contacting claimants, and I hope the Minister will be able to address this point later, taking into account affordability and making sure claimants are fully aware of the scale of debt and indeed the options available to them. But improving customer service can only go so far. As I've said, debt and deductions are playing a much bigger role in social security now than they've done historically, largely because of the failure of universal credit to live up to the claims which were made for it, and this is not a situation which could be welcomed at the best of times, and certainly not in the middle of the worst cost of living crisis for a generation. Thank you, Dame Maria.